Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
Hey, and I'm Nile.
And Nile, this week I'm here to synthesize two of my favorite subjects. Can I say that? Am I allowed to say that right off the bat?
I mean, yeah, I don't really see anything in the bylaws that says you can't. Let me double check here.
He's deep in the books.
If you can try to synthesize two of your favorite things, you can definitely bring it to the show as long as it fits into the umbrella of the world of weird, Kyle.
Okay, well, I have great news. Rules. I have great news about that, Nile.
Okay.
This week I wanted to talk to you about UFOs and world history. I know that doesn't sound like me, but I that's what I'm going for this week.
I really thought you found a way to synthesize some sort of like anime and philosophy or something, maybe and somehow make that weird. I don't know. I figured maybe you were going for something like that, but so we have UFOs and world history, both, which really, honestly, if you were to ask me what your favorite things were, they really should be at the top now. Then we do know each other quite well. But so what kind of history are we talking about here? Are we talking about actual history, or are we talking about, the
kind of history we dabble in?
Yeah, I was going to say speculative history, right, if we're going to treat it kindly.
Well, here's the thing. I do like when the subject of UFOs juts up against real history. And this one is pretty much real history. I mean, obviously there's a side to it that is pretty unreal, and we'll get to that. But this is a real historical thing. Now, I'm gonna warn everyone, including Nile, right now, just up front. I have to talk about death and disease a lot in this episode.
Okay.
So you've been warned. Just letting you know, if that's not something you want to hear, if that sounds too what did I say? Negative vibes. I get it. But you've been warned.
Okay, so when we're talking about disease here, we're talking about a specific disease, we're talking about like some sort of I really worry that you're going to be like, oh, we're going to talk about how UFOs cause SARS or something.
Well, that's almost guaranteed to be an actual theory that somebody's put out there, but I'm going a bit older than that. I'm going to talk to you about the Black Death and plague UFOs.
Plague UFO. Okay, so UFOs during the plague.
Yes.
Okay.
These are considered. We'll get to this, but I kind of want to say put the concept out there, so it's kind of marinating in your brain, juices while we're talking about this. But this is about the custodian UFOs of planet Earth.
Okay.
Have you run up into that term before now?
I'm not sure. It really depends on what you mean by that. I guess if you're saying, have I run across that term? I don't. It doesn't ring a bell. But I have read a lot of stuff of aliens that are either helping, watching over and guiding humanity or something like that. I don't know if that's what we're talking about here, or if it's literally they are custodians of the Earth itself as a physical place.
Well, not to bury the lead too much here, but this is custodians of the Earth as in having custody of the Earth.
Oh, okay. So So we're not talking about custodian like the like term it for
No.
for like the school janitor. They're not like coming around with a mop bucket on Earth or something.
This isn't like, a gray from Beetlejuice that's like dressed up as a cute little like high school janitor or anything like that. No. These are UFOs, aliens that have some sort of ownership over Earth, and we'll get into it.
Okay.
And I swear to God, it totally relates to the Black Plague, at least in this particular theory.
Okay.
So
some alien actually accidentally sneezed outside of their containment suit and caused the Black Plague.
Pretty much, yeah. They came down and they sneezed and they were like, "Oh fuck, that one's dying really bad," and they just like ran back into their ship and got out of there. So I'm gonna kick this one off by giving you a brief overview of the historical epidemic known as the Black Death. So started off with some fun.
We're gonna. This will be the up tax of this episode. You know how
Right.
when you're watching the movie Up, you have to like go through the really sad part to get to like the fun whimsical old man adventure.
Exactly. Yeah, there's going to be lots of whimsy and old men after we're done talking about the historical plague that killed tons of people. So, for starters, the Black Death began in 1346, and it quote-unquote ended in 1351. I put quotations around that because, like, it's still cropped up multiple times. There's plagues that also precede the Black Death, but this is, like, one of the big ones, right? It's also called the Great Mortality or just simply the Plague, and it is the most fatal pandemic in human history, or I guess epidemic. The Black Death is believed to have been caused by bubonic plague, caused by a plague bacterium, and by the end of the pandemic, the disease is estimated to have killed somewhere between 30 to 60% of the European population. That's not like the total population. It could be about half of the population died. Like,
Jesus. Okay.
Tons of people died. I was honestly like kind of unaware of just how fatal this was. Millions and millions of people.
Yeah, I feel like you learn about the Black Plague in like world history classes and stuff, and you learn about it at a time that you don't really grasp the enormity of it.
Right.
And then we never like circle back around to that in your adult life when it's like, oh, that's really fucking big.
Yeah, I mean, like it's exactly like you say. Like, I feel like being like just casually like, oh, they mention the Black Plague and something to do with rats and disease and stuff, and in like hearing that in like middle school or high school, you just like don't really grasp it. And I don't know why that would be, but now, like, especially after what we've gone through in the last year, I kind of have like reflected on the profundity of like 50%, like maybe 50% of a population of an entire like fucking nation just dying. Like, that's crazy, right? So it definitely there is some stuff here that made my blood run cold, but then there was some stuff that
got your juices flowing,
giggled darkly, I guess.
Okay.
A giggle darkly.
That is my favorite movie based off of Philip K. Dick short story.
yeah, starring sexy cyberpunk man. What's his name? Whatever.
Well, we have
know who I'm talking
that
about.
movie's Robert Downey Jr. and man, I don't remember who else is in that movie. It's been too long. I guess that
Isn't
might go
Bill
on
and
the
Ted
rewatch
in that
pile.
or whatever?
Bill and Ted? Keanu?
Isn't Keanu in that movie? Am I crazy? I might be insane.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Am I confusing? Am I confusing Robert Downey Jr. and Keanu Reeves? That seems wild.
Is this just is this just the consequence of recording later at night than we usually do? Are we both just like our brains are on their way out right now?
It is Keanu Reeves.
Okay.
And also Robert Downey Jr. Okay.
Well, we were both right, so our brains are sharp as a tack.
And Winona Ryder.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Jesus Christ.
And Woody Harrelson. All right. Anyway, sorry. That was...
his new name's like Shoddy Harrelson or something, or Wavy Harrelson. Did you see this?
No, I didn't see this. What are you talking about?
All right.
Is this like a Snoop Lion situation?
Am I insane? Okay, so I'm I I must have seen this scrolling around online recently because I googled Woody Harrelson new name, and the first article is no. The first article is no. Woody Harrelson did not change his name to Swoosh Harrelson.
Oh my god.
Okay. I pranked myself by not clicking and looking at the thing that I read and just seeing it and digesting it and
Now I need to go figure out what the article is that made people think he was changing his name to Swoosh Harrelson. Was this like a weird ad campaign or something?
It was probably some bullshit post somebody made as a joke, and I just like saw it, went, huh, that's weird, and kept scrolling. That's my best guess. My God. Wow, great start by me here today. Wow, right, the Black Plague, that's what we were talking about. The point of origin with the Black Plague is kind of a contention with historians. It's believed to have begun somewhere in Central or East Asia, but the first definitive case was recorded as occurring when the Turkic tribal confederation known as the Kipchak people led a siege against an Italian-Genoese trading port in Crimea in 1347. So technically starts a year before, but the first, I think, documented case is during this particular altercation. And apparently, the Kipchak army began to fall ill during this siege, and with their numbers quickly dwindling, they would then load the diseased bodies of their dead and launch them into the port town.
That, as a biological weapon?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yes. To inflict the disease upon the people they were fighting with. Yes. And it worked.
Jesus. Okay.
So that helped spread the disease, but then after the conflict, Genoese slave ships would then sail out to other Mediterranean trading posts, and then they would just carry the disease with them. And so that resulted in the plague spreading inland, and over time, pretty much all of Europe would just get fucked. Just absolutely fucked. And but it would also reach northern Africa and parts of Western Asia. And it is very commonly believed that the ships carried rats who in turn carried fleas that had the Yersinia pestis bacteria, which causes pneumonic and bubonic plague.
Okay.
Now,
so that's where the rats came after the trebuchets of dead bodies.
Yeah, yes. Well, the idea is just they're getting infected while they're parked in their ships at this port town, and then they're fighting these people, and they're just launching the dead bodies from their ships into the town. But the rat thing is the prevailing theory, or it was. But
in reality, it's aliens.
In reality, it's aliens. Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll get to that. I'm guessing. I might be getting ahead of myself here.
No, very, very soon we will get to that. I promise. I am going to spare you the details of the gruesome symptoms of the plague, but just understand it really fucking sucks. And the bubonic side of it is named after the bubo bumps that appear on the skin of its victims. And oh man, the descriptions of that is it's harrowing. But the plague would eventually peter out, and this is believed to be the result of, guess what? Quarantining. And I picked up a little fun fact here, which is that the word quarantine came from the Italians who engaged in something that they called Trentino, which is a period of 30-day isolation to prevent the spread of the plague. But then quarantine would be the same thing, but 40-day periods.
Okay.
Yeah. Trentino to quarantine.
That makes a lot of, just with the basic, numeral words, that makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the 40-day period, apparently this was based on symbolic and religious importance for the Christians, which it's hilarious to me, right? Because it's the 40 days, 40 nights thing, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like they were prescribed a 30-day isolation period, and then just because it has religious significance, they tacked on an extra 10 days.
Okay. And I guess, look, if you're gonna go, you might as well go in a Lincoln, you know? You might as well just like really go for it.
I guess.
If you're gonna like hang out by yourself somewhere, you might as well do the whole like Jesus 40 days in the desert kind of thing.
Right.
And do the 40 days and 40 nights as well. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Man, do you remember did you ever this was a movie that was on Comedy Central like all the time when I was a kid. Do you remember the like Josh Hartnett movie, I think, 40 Days and 40 Nights?
Oh my god, that sounds familiar.
I believe the movie is about he has to stop fucking for 40 days and 40 nights to like prove himself to some girl that he wants to impress, and there's like people trying to fuck him really bad throughout it.
What?
Yeah, this is a movie that I kept like that and Saving Silverman were like two that seemed to always be on Comedy Central when I was growing up. So and when you said 40 Days and 40 Nights, you would think that my mind would go to the fucking scripture, but no, it went to this really bad movie that I used to watch on TV all the time.
Oh my god, man. Well, I mean, that must have been a really tough prescription to take back then.
Yeah, that was my 40 days inside for religious reasons. Is watching that movie, I guess. So.
There you go. 40 Days and 40 Nights of 40 Days and 40 Nights.
Don't make me start that podcast.
Oh God!
Actually, let me pitch that to worst idea of all time, because I think that they need something new to watch, because they finished watching all of the like whatever that like softcore porn series from the 80s was on Showtime or Skinamax, whatever the fuck.
Yeah, that somebody else can torture themselves with that particular film.
Anyway, so back to the Black Death, because that's what we're actually talking about. We're not talking about like bad early 2000s Josh Hartnett movies.
Yeah, well, they would do these quarantine practices in which there was probably no fucking, unless I guess, you know, you were quarantined with your sexual partner. Wow, would you believe it? These quarantine practices would help cull the spread of the plague, which by 1351 had killed somewhere, like I said, between 30 to 60% of the population of Europe. Okay. So quarantining works, and was working back then. And here's another fact that I didn't know. Apparently, the ravaging of Europe via the plague was blamed on the Jews. Once again, a scapegoat for world problems.
Why? What was the reasoning there? I realize that it's not going to make any actual sense, but what was the reasoning?
I think it was a couple different things. It did lead to a lot of like really horrible anti-Semitic violence, but like one of the reasons that I read is I think in one particular community, the Jewish people were accused of like poisoning the local well. Was one of the things that I read. And it's funny because there was actually an attempt by, I think, one of the popes to just straight up like write up legislation that said the Jews did not poison the well with disease. Like, you can't. We
got to get it on the record from the Pope. Okay.
Yeah, so it got really crazy. The thing that's really wild about this, though, is religious zealots would crop up, and this was people who were basically believed the plague was the result of God being really pissed at them. And these people also typically ended up being anti-Semitic as well. And one of these zealot groups was known as the Flagellants, or the Brothers of the Cross, and they would there's like, you can find depictions of them. They would walk around with these like black hoods over their faces, but then the rest of their body is just half naked, and they would walk around lashing themselves with whips and stuff, and they would just like make themselves bloody and then go and commit violent anti-Semitic crimes. Like, really crazy shit.
Okay. That just reminded me of I'm trying to remember if that's the like
Monty Python.
That literally is literally in the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, well, there's the guy in the Da Vinci Code who like self-flagellates and I don't remember anything else about that book. He's like albino or whatever, and you know what I'm saying?
That's what I was trying to remember, was if that was the whole like Brotherhood of the Cross thing.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe. But I do want you
not
to...
important.
Well, I want you to keep in mind that, of course, this disease that was killing people en masse did result in a lot of social unrest that caused violence. So keep that in your mind.
Okay. Seems possible.
Yeah, it's important for this particular story. Another important note is that there's a lot of contention surrounding the various historical and statistical facts regarding the Black Death, which is basically, this is just due to gaps in historical data that are just due to how things went down. Because, for instance, there was no census taken during the time of the plague, so data is based on records by the clergy for the most part, and incomplete. Okay. There's like drama also about how the plague itself is actually spread, which is another important factoid to keep in mind with this particular story. But this is because some scientists argue, and these scientists actually have gained some traction, it's more likely that it spread from human to human contact through body lice and fleas that are on people. So there's a lot of research to suggest that that's actually what happened. So it's less that rats brought fleas that then, spread the disease to people, but rather people spread the disease to people. Yeah, just keep that in mind. So there's other factors too, but I'll leave that stuff to the historians and epidemiologists, because where we're going, we don't need real history or epidemiology. But in these inconsistencies and gaps of data, that's where the conspiracy stuff thrives. So,
of course,
here's the next portion of our topic. This is an author named William Bramley, and I want to talk in particular about his ideas in the book The Gods of Eden, first published in 1989. Now, once again, I feel like I need to pause and mention here that in my research on Bramley, I found him to have some pretty Islamophobic ideas. Like, there's a big theme in his ideas in this book about like violent discontent and war and stuff are kind of important to these custodian UFOs. And he like goes out of his way to talk. He has a particular fixation on Muslims.
Fantastic.
So I omitted that aspect of it because it's like I can talk about these ideas without talking about that stuff. But just so you know, if you go and like look into this guy, you'll find that he has a bit of a hard-on for talking about how Muslims are the current faction, quote unquote, that's like bringing hot war onto the scene.
Okay.
So I feel like I want to mention that so I don't just like, I feel like it just needs to be said and gotten out of the way. He might even have some anti-Semitism going on. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I feel like it's always worth noting the controversy section.
Yeah,
just to get it out of the way and make sure that we're not doing this in a way that doesn't serve the fact that there's problems to a lot of this shit.
Yeah, I don't want people to think that like, oh, this guy's so cool with his weird UFO theories. No, I think this guy kind of sucks, but I do want to talk about these ideas because and they really touch on so many other things that we've talked about on this show. But, just a heads up, if you look into him, he sucks ass. He's like kind of shitty. So a lot of my information came from his book and a few other articles, including an interview that he gave in 2008 to the website earthfiles.com, and his interviewer, Linda Moulton Howe, who UFO heads might recognize the name because she is the woman behind a documentary about cattle mutilations called A Strange Harvest, which I've seen part of.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's like a pretty big name in American ufology, and she's involved with a lot of UFO stuff of the last couple decades. So she's pretty important to ufology, and she interviews this guy. Now, The Gods of Eden is it's like 260 pages worth of conspiracy theory about the involvement of UFOs in the history of humanity. And one particular chapter posits a theory that has persisted to this day in certain UFO communities. Are UFOs and their pilots responsible for the myriad disease and plague outbreaks through history and other problems that humanity has faced? Even worse, does this disastrous influence, like I said, spread beyond disease and into just general historical calamity, war, for instance? Now, like I said, we've butted up against this idea before. In fact, he kicks off his interview by referencing being influenced by Zecharia Sitchin, which I don't remember which episode we talked about this guy in, but that's an author of conspiracy texts who connects the Anunnaki conspiracy and the planet Nibiru to ancient Mesopotamian Sumerian culture. So in one of those episodes, Anunnaki or Nibiru or whatever, we talked about this guy.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So Bramley then says that this idea of Sitchin's influenced his interest in questions like, why do we go to war? And he's like, he kind of frames it in this funny way. He's like, well, I assume that like when I started writing on this subject, it would just be, oh, war is about these like obvious economic motives, which is fine. But also, I don't know how you like stumble into the theories that he comes up with. You like if you go into this assuming such a very like benign thing like that, it's like, how did you come up with a 260 page like ultra theory on the UFOs involved in human affairs? Like how is that what you stumbled into that? He makes it sound unassuming. So according to his account, after reading Sitchin's theories, he also mentions Charles Fort a couple times, which
fair.
We haven't talked about Fort on this show, but he is important to so many things, conspiracies, UFOs, the paranormal, all of it. We'll talk about him someday.
Yeah, that's definitely at least one episode. But
yeah.
Sitchin, we really should do. I don't think we've done a full on Sitchin episode, but they're like very important to a lot of this stuff. All right, so that's the realm we're working in.
Yeah, and what's tough about like talking about somebody like Sitchin, and honestly, even this, I had to fixate on the plague aspect in one or two particular chapters of his grand conspiracy theory, but it's because they tend to bleed into other stories that we've already talked about and overlap so much that I'm just like rehashing ideas, which I tried to kind of avoid to doing like in this episode, but in some cases it was hard. So according to his account, after reading Sitchin's theories, Bramley just felt it was like impossible to ignore this synthesis of religious belief, war, and an interfering alien race that has some sort of interest in humanity. And he thinks that religious beliefs that lead to apocalyptic beliefs and zealous war don't come from humanity itself, but rather alien forces that are either implanting them in us or influencing us to be more destructive in the name of our religions. And so his book focuses on like especially apocalyptic eras in the history of humanity.
Okay.
One of the frustrating things in trying to fact check this book is the sources it cites are all these older books that are published like as early as the 1920s. He even like cites some texts that like he's like, yeah, this was published back in the 1400s. And I'm like, okay, well, where did you get that, sir? I can't look. Where did you find this?
He had access to a really good library. We've really underfunded our library system and need to make sure that it is there for all of our budding conspiracy theorists out there to get access to everything. Because this would be prearchive.org, so we don't have like Libris Arcana or like any of those kinds of sites that are like, they work on to digitizing the text. So he had to have gotten the actual books somehow, or some sort of reprint.
I'm assuming that, and here's the thing. Now that you say that, it does put in my mind that he probably had access to the Akashic Records, and I just I don't know why I don't think about that.
Yeah, he had an Akashic Records terminal.
Yeah, this is like they have infinite knowledge in the Akashic records. So like, why don't these particular people who research this stuff just like reach up there and pluck a book up there? But like, oh, here's what the UFOs were doing in 1462. Gotcha.
Yeah, everyone's so fucking upset about the Library of Alexandria, but we've got the Akashic records. It's all there.
Right.
Fuck it.
Well, if that burned down, we'd be in a spot of trouble. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
The Library of Alexandria is one thing. The Akashic records, that's a whole different story. So, no horses and stables with lanterns in that situation. Please and thanks.
Yeah. All right. So the Library of Congress archives tweets.
Oh,
Does the Akashic records?
I mean, it has to, right? So
Yeah, you think it would have to.
every time somebody tweeted that image at some politician they don't like of a pig taking a poop on its own balls, that's been put up in the Akashic records. Every instance of that is up there. You're gonna get some sort of like ascended enlightenment, and you're gonna all right, I'm rifling through the Akashic records. You're gonna pull the first document, and it's gonna just be that image tweeted by XXX Weed 420 Sniper XXX on Twitter.
This reminds me so much of that, like, when Jesus was in the Garden of Eden and he saw every sin committed on the earth before he, like, accepted us and went off to get crucified. So that means he must have seen someone jerking at Waluigi hentai. Like, it reminds me, this whole conversation reminds me of that post so much. And that's a thing that, like, I occasionally just pops into my brain and I have to sit down. It's such, like, a wild concept. And like, because it's technically in the text of the Bible, it's technically true.
Oh God! So that means he's seen not only that, but like every time we bared witness to Goatsy, or we fucking sent a friend like a shock website like Tub Girl, like every single time. We can't. This is why we gotta. This is why we must be chaste and pure at all times.
Jesus. It's really just to save, Jesus Christ from going the way of like the Facebook moderators that like get PTSD from monitoring Facebook. Yeah. It's Jesus Christ. This has gone way off the rails.
not even Jesus has the stomach to sit through all that material. So if we were to try and tackle each conspiracy put forth by this book, and every conspiracy that those conspiracies were linked with, we would have the next like year's worth of content at least. There is some important context that needs to be said, however, that I kind of got to brush through so that we can get to the actual topic. So first, there are key players in this theory. One is an ancient secret order known as the Brotherhood of the Snake. This is a lot of your basic secret society stuff, but it also kind of meshes with reptilian conspiracy. And it seems that at one point, the people involved with the Brotherhood were trying to like spread wisdom and enlightenment throughout the human race. But another key figure steps in here, who I've mentioned multiple times now. That is the Custodians. And the Custodians are an ancient extraterrestrial race that does far more than visit Earth. Bramley sort of theorizes that UFO visitation in the form of the custodial society is through this ownership of the planet Earth. And while Bramley coined the term custodians, the aforementioned Sitchin and Charles Fort were both sort of pioneers of this like idea of an alien race owning the Earth. For instance, he references a creation story from Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets in which a quote-unquote god is put to death, and then the body and blood are mixed into clay, and then out of this concoction a human being is made. And he takes this idea and then kind of warps it to say that it's actually meant to imply the process of genetic engineering. And
yeah, that is a very common thing with go ahead.
And he just says that humans were developed by these custodians to become a slave race for the alien society. And Bramley also uses this theory to posit that this could also explain the extinction of the human subspecies Neanderthals. So here's what he says. He says, it might be conjectured that Neanderthal man was either exterminated or hauled off to make room for the new slave race, and perhaps to prevent breeding between the two subspecies. So again, this is where we're again like sort of butting up against all these other theories that we've talked about on the show before, but this is all to say that there's like these are like the lead up to actually him talking about how they were involved with the Black Plague.
So frankly, this guy thinks that Earth's landlords are aliens.
Yes.
And they just come around every once in a while to like mow the grass and stuff. Like, remember our old landlord that we would just like, we would look out the window and he would just be like mowing the grass outside of our house. And it was just like, call us, please. Like, what are you doing?
I remember, he was, for as far as landlords go, not the worst, that guy, but he did show up randomly at like, he would like show up at dinner time and just like knock on the door and be like, well, I'm here to replace your, the light fixture in this room. And we're just like eating spaghetti, just like, come on in, man. And yeah, he would just like show up and cut grass randomly and stuff. I do remember that man. I hope he's doing okay.
Yeah. So that in my mind is what these custodian aliens are. They're just the landlord of Earth.
Imagine if that landlord that we had would show up and then also occasionally just like walk up to us and just like spray diseases in our face and see what happens.
Just like inject us with a needle and then like leave. Yeah. Okay. So it's maybe a little more invasive.
Yes. All right. Now, all of this wild shit about custodians and the Brotherhood of the Snake is also tied into the Bible, of course. And the really short version of this is that God, literally anytime God is mentioned in this book, it's in quotations. It's that God is actually representative of the custodians, it seems. And he kind of points to the story of Adam and Eve here. And then the Brotherhood was represented by the snake in the Garden of Eden. And I kind of got the impression, though I couldn't get too deep into it because it's an entire episode in and of itself, but the Brotherhood at one point seemed to kind of want to share knowledge with humanity, while this so-called God figure wanted to prevent humans from acquiring knowledge. And this is all a long, rambling bit of conspiracy trivia from a book, all to make the point that at some point, I think the Brotherhood ended up corrupted by evil, because he refers to them in the later chapters that I was reading about the Black Death and stuff as being corrupted. And so by the time the Black Death happens, and probably prior to that, the Brotherhood is more akin to these like influencers who work in the name of the custodians or something like that. And I'm thinking about how funny my choice of word of influencer is there.
Yeah, it was very evocative, and I just started imagining moodily lit photos on Instagram, but that's maybe not what we're looking for here. We're talking about like agents, like boots on the ground kind of thing, kind of trying to influence humanity and work for the interests of our custodians here.
Yes, and so like the like details of their relationship is kind of unclear to me, but I'd have to dedicate again at minimum a whole episode to the Brotherhood of the Snake, and also, as I found, probably spend a good portion of that episode explaining the origins of the ignorance of anti-Semitism. So another time, I guess.
Yeah. That sounds like a really fun episode of the podcast.
Yeah.
Let's dive into the reason for like the like history of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. So sometimes I feel like it is my responsibility to ultimately address the problem of anti-Semitism and conspiracy, but I haven't figured out how to do that in a way that's funny yet. So I'll get back to you. So now that we know who the custodians and the Brotherhood are, or we have a vague idea of who they are, we can talk about their involvement in the Black Death. So Bramley's interpretation of historical texts on the Black Death is occasionally sensationalized, to say the least. Like there's a point where he basically is just like, a historian would check the text just to see like what's going on here, and they would find themselves flabbergasted all to fuck. It's not what he says, but it's like kind of laid out like that.
That's verbatim.
Yeah.
From the book. He's flabbergasted all to fuck.
It would be more fun to read if it was like that. So his first major point is that it's odd that the plague was able to effectively wipe out isolated populations that had no prior contact with infected areas. He also points out a fact that, to be fair, is also like pointed out by legitimate historians, which is that Historical records suggest the presence of rats was not as substantial as the common theories about the plague would suggest. This is like an actually salient point about how we typically understand the spread of the plague during this time. In fact, I found an article where an archaeologist named Barney Sloan cites. He
really digs into this article and calls it a piece of shit.
He really calls it a real piece of shit. Now, he cites this archaeological record of dead rats in the area where like the plague took place. And the article's titled "Black Death Study Lets Rats Off the Hook." So,
aka the subtitle "Rats Off to You."
Yeah, rats off to you. Sloan basically states that the findings of rat corpses that shouldn't be funny to me, but in this archaeological record, the amount of rat death that was happening at the time is insufficient for the explanation that the pest coming in, dying, and like spreading these fleas is the primary spreader of the disease. It's possible it was a factor, but it doesn't match up with some of the data, basically. So research as recent as a 2018 study supports this theory, showing that it was more likely, like I said at the start of the episode, spread in human-to-human contact via body lice on fleas, or from fleas on humans. And so that also would be a pretty good explainer for why people could like bring it into their towns and that are like mostly isolated. But like, you know, they have to go out and get supplies, they have to go out and get food and other goods too. So I think there's other factors there. I'm not a historian, but the impression that I get is that the human to human contact is why it was able to spread in the weird ways it did.
Okay. So we've literally been scapegoating rats in our historical accounts for quite some time. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's possible that rats were involved, but like it seems that humans were the primary. And I mean, this is also why quarantines worked well, right? Like people stopped having contact with each other and then it stopped spreading. Yeah. So Bramley, of course, thinks that there is a more extraterrestrial explanation. So here I have a passage from the book, and it says, to solve these puzzles... Oh, here's the... This is what I was referencing earlier. To solve these puzzles, a historian would normally look to records from the plague years to see what people were reporting. When he does so, he encounters stories so stunning and unbelievable that he is likely to reject them as the fantasies and superstitions of badly frightened minds. A great many people throughout Europe and other plague-stricken regions of the world were reporting that outbreaks of the plague were caused by foul-smelling mists. Those mists frequently appeared after unusually bright lights in the sky. The historian quickly discovers that mists and bright lights were reported far more frequently and in many more locations than were rodent infestations. The plague years were, in fact, a period of heavy UFO activity.
Okay, so we have aliens like crop dusting places with the plague is what we're getting at here? Is that where we're headed? Okay.
Yes, that is exactly where we're going. You nailed it in one. He goes on to explain that in the years leading up to the Black Death, there were numerous odd sightings in the sky. And again, I just have to say, I can't back up what he's saying here. I tried really hard to find some of these texts, and I don't have access to them. So I don't know if these like historical, I'm assuming here's what's kind of, I guess, dangerous in my mind about Bramley's work is that he does do research. Like, it is very clear that he is doing research on this stuff, and it's like, I don't know if well written, but it's competently written. And it comes across as like learned, right? But I'm assuming that there's some missing context in some of this stuff. And I'm assuming that some of these passages are just like taken to sort of fit his needs, because they're typically very brief blurbs that sound weird.
Okay.
So in particular, he references a comet over Europe described as being of awe-inspiring blackness. And he references a column of fire reported over the Pope's palace at Avignon, France, and a ball of fire that was observed over Paris. And that last one is, I guess, it's supposedly remained out in the open and visible to the public for quite some time. And he explains that back then these sightings were considered by most people to be ill omens, and perhaps foretelling of the coming plague. And he also makes another point that the word comet in these accounts could refer to just about any aerial phenomena. And that would include early recordings of UFO events. Like he talks about, I don't remember where it was, but he talks about like a sketch that was written down from like I want to say 12th century, and it's referred to as a comet, but he says that the drawing like looks like it's depicting a craft with like windows, which again, I can't see this unfortunately. But that's what he uses to say, oh, even UFO phenomena is referred to as a comet.
Okay, so we know already from our biblical UFO episode that a tower of fire can just be a UFO.
Right.
And we have a large fireball in France, and then we have a comet that is actually a UFO that is stunning in its blackness. Is that what you said? Startling?
It was awe-inspiring blackness. It was composed of awe-inspiring blackness, which I think to me is meant to just say it was a big shadowy object.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of this too, like I said, it's like comets can be anything, any aerial phenomena. So, you know, when it can be anything, you know, I guess the immediate leap to UFOs is, I mean, I don't know. It could be so many different things. Like, I mean, even I've seen like imagine being a 13th century peasant and seeing a green fireball comet, right? Like,
yeah,
break your brain.
But and I also like it is technically fitting the definition of unidentified flying object, because that is what it is. But like, whether or not that means it's an alien craft, yada yada yada, all that kind of stuff. I just like the fact that we saw a column of fire made me immediately think back to the biblical UFOs thing.
Yeah,
I thought that topic was still like one of my favorite weird rabbit holes I went down. But so I'm just trying to figure out if I've happened into a bunch of like ancient civilizations trying to reinterpret things as like UFOs and aliens and everything lately between like the stuff in my last couple episodes, and it's always interesting to hear like what people try to finagle into being about UFOs when they research ancient history. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying here is it's cool that we're doing another history thing, because I've thought about this a lot lately, and the fact that we're just like he's picking these. So do you know that these three things are actually like recorded events in the time frame, or were we able to like check any of that stuff, or is it just going at his word?
Okay, I can't confirm a lot of it, but I have an idea. So we're going to kind of get into that. Like with the comets, I'm assuming people are actually seeing like meteorites and things like that. I mean, like if you just think about the idea of like, oh, they didn't have like massive cities that would like prevent you from seeing the night sky. And if you can see the full night sky like just about every night, you're going to see more like celestial phenomena like that, right? So I'm assuming that the kind of frequency with which this stuff seemed to occur, at least based on Bramley's account, is just like they were able to see more in the sky than we are.
True.
And, you know, they have less of an idea of what's going on up there than we do. So it's hard for me to like really come down on one side or the other. I think that he really is pulling a lot of out of context stuff, but I have references that I have like taken from his book that are in fact real. I just don't know if I'm missing any context. And I have some alternate ideas. Like when we get to the mists, I have a whole thing I want to talk about with those. So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. Okay. So he uses this framing of comets as harbingers of apocalyptic doom to cite passages from various texts that contain accounts made by witnesses of these so-called comets. And so here's just a few of those accounts that he references. So I have one here. In 1117, In January, a comet passed like a fiery army from the north towards the Orient. The moon was overcast blood red in an eclipse. A year later, a light appeared more brilliant than the sun. This was followed by great cold, famine, and plague, of which 1/3 of humanity is said to have perished.
Okay.
In the year 1606, a comet was seen, after which a general plague traversed the world. In 1582, a comet brought so violent a plague upon Maho, Prague, Thuringia, the Netherlands, and other places that in Thuringia it carried off 37,000, and in the Netherlands 46,415.
So has anyone seen some really wild comets in, I don't know, like January, February 2020?
That's a good question. So one thing that's kind of funny is I found this guy and his book from that interview, and that interview was originally published in 2008, and then in February of this year it got like reposted to the website. So
Look, you got to hit that SEO when you can, you know?
Yeah, presumably this became relevant in people's minds again in that community, just because, you know, you could point to COVID-19 and be like, the fucking aliens are at it again, man.
Yeah.
So there's more sightings, but this is all meant to suggest that the comet sightings that preceded mass death by plague was not a natural phenomena, but rather UFO visitations. Now, the appearance of comets at times of turmoil alone would not be sufficient to propose alien visitation. Fortunately, he has other sightings that surround the plague, probably the most shocking of all of them. He claims that these accounts are people who have witnessed strange human-like figures dressed in black, sometimes carrying odd instruments.
Anytime you say that, I always my mind immediately goes to Men in Black, but it also could just be aliens. You can keep going. I'm my wheels are turning.
Oh yeah. Well, these figures dressed in black were said to precede the arrival of the plague, sometimes by weeks, other times by mere moments, which I didn't really understand how that works or makes sense, but that's how it's like phrased. Like this figure would show up, people would see it, and then like moments later, people would just be like sick with the plague.
Okay.
But I didn't like read an account that was saying that happened. That was just like in Bramley's kind of text. So fortunately for us, he does have some passages from other historical texts that he cites as encounters with these men in black. This one says, in Brandenburg in Germany, there appeared in 1559 horrible men, of whom at first 15 and later on 12 were seen. The foremost had beside their posteriors little heads, the others fearful faces and long scythes, with which they cut at the oats, so that the swish could be heard at a great distance. But the oats remained standing. When a quantity of people came running out to see them, they went on with their mowing. And then... Go ahead.
Did I hear something about heads near their butts?
It says the foremost had beside their posteriors little heads, the others fearful faces and long scythes.
Okay, and then the scythes didn't cut?
So we're going to talk about this, but this passage suggests that they would be swinging these scythes over the oats, and it would make a loud, like, swooshing noise, in reference to Swoosh Harrelson.
Yeah.
And
oh, good. Swoosh got involved in all this. Now, is Swoosh involved in like actually dropping the plague onto this wheat or whatever this is?
Swoosh Harrelson, as we now know him, is actually a member of the Brotherhood of the Snake.
Oh, okay. See, that ties it all together.
Yeah, that's how it all comes together naturally. So yeah, I don't entirely know what to make of this, but I have some thoughts. Here's another account. In Hungary, in the year of Christ, 1571, was seen at Kremnitz in the mountain towns of Hungary on Ascension Day in the evening, to the great perturbation of all, when on the Schulersberg there appeared so many black riders that the opinion was prevalent that the Turks were making a secret raid, but who rapidly disappeared again, and thereupon a raging plague broke out in the neighborhood. So this one's just like, some people on horseback showed up, we saw them for a moment, they left, also then we immediately got sick.
Okay. I mean, all of these things are very weird if you take them at face value.
Right. Bramley goes on to explain that these strange visitors were typically, like I said, immediately followed by the outbreak of deadly plague. He talks about how like these people would appear in the interim between UFOs showing up and people contracting the plague in the towns where the UFOs were. So it kind of sometimes seems to imply that the UFOs are like seen and then they drop off whatever these men in black are. And the men in black come and like sow the disease among the people of the town or whatever, and then they disappear. That's kind of what's implied. He doesn't say that outright. Bramley claims that in some of these stories, the men in black were seen off in the distance amid stalks of grain, where they would wave a scythe-like instrument around, creating a loud whooshing sound. Now, here's just me butting in with my little bit of interpretation here. And honestly, I wish I could consult Garrett on this. I didn't think about this. But there's another thing that comes in later where it's like, this is like the common thing to believe at the time. And that, or at least that's how it sounds to me. What I'm trying to say here is I'm wondering if this is like the symbology of death has like by at this point been associated with the Grim Reaper, right? The like hooded figure of death.
Okay. That would make sense.
So I'm wondering, which like that's all from like ancient mythologies, Sharon and stuff like that. And I just kind of wonder if that's what this is just like people like talking about these symbols of death appearing in their town as the plague came. And it's kind of a sensational like story about what happens, like what precedes the arrival of mass death. But I don't really know that for sure. I kind of tried to look into the origins of the Grim Reaper as a figure of death, and it really is just these like mythological stories are basically the origin point for this thing. So it's long been associated that these like scythe carrying hooded black robed figures are death.
Okay.
But in his interpretation, it says here, it appears that the scythes may have been long instruments designed to spray poison or germ-laden gas. This would mean that the townspeople misinterpreted the movement of the scythes as an attempt to cut oats, when in fact the movements were the act of spraying aerosols on the town.
I imagine like I always like try to picture these things and think about like, you know, how we have like sprayers for like pesticides and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And if I were someone who didn't know what that was, but I knew what a scythe was, would it be like close enough that I would think that's what is going on? But I also think that like that is really going and looking for aliens to be the thing. Whereas like the whole idea of death and like what looks like the historical representations of death kind of being preceding these massive events like the Black Plague makes a lot more sense in a lot of ways. Like this, it feels like Occam's razor would just say, yeah, they just like they're talking about having some like omen of what happened because it gives them like, you know, it makes things make sense as opposed to this coming out of nowhere.
Yeah. Which, yeah, for sure. That's kind of how I see it too. And just to be clear, I'm kind of picturing like a Ghostbusters style, like ghost pack thing, but instead of sucking up ghosts, it sprays disease, and it's like a long black instrument that they. So like the whooshing is the sound of the aerosol spray, and the movement is them trying to like aerosolize it.
Okay, so but what that does work. Now, what if instead, they actually are just spraying ghosts, and those
Oh.
ghosts are what causes the plague.
Oh, we forgot about the possibility of a ghost layer.
Yeah, I feel like, because why just add aliens into this?
Right.
Why can't we try to fit in ghosts and maybe Bigfoot?
Are you going to be satisfied if I bring up souls, which is kind of like a type of ghost, in a little bit here? Would that sit right with you?
Look, if that's what I have to take, then that's what I'll take. Like, it will be kind of a consolation prize.
Yeah.
But it will be hey, sometimes you come in second place and it's okay.
Thank you. I appreciate your capitulation. So this brings us to the third piece of so-called evidence. This is what Bramley interprets to be chemical or biological defoliants being sprayed on the human population by custodial UFO visitors and or their peons. The supporting evidence, he claims, is also the most frequently reported phenomena associated with the Black Plague, which is strange noxious mists and pestilent fogs. And so I have a couple of his examples. During the whole of the year 1382, there was no wind, in consequence of which the air grew putrid, so that an epidemic broke out, and the plague did not pass from one man to another, but everyone who was killed by it got it straight from the air. A Prague chronicle describes the epidemic in China, India, and Persia, and the Florentine historian Matteo Villani, who took up the work of his brother Giovanni after he had died of the plague in Florence, relays the account of earthquakes and pestilential fogs from a traveler in Asia as well. So here we have another account. A similar incident of earthquake and pestilential fog was reported from Cyprus, and it was believed that the wind had been so poisonous that men were struck down and died from it. German accounts speak of a heavy, vile-smelling mist which advanced from the east and spread itself over Italy. People were convinced that they could contract the disease from the stench, or even, as is sometimes described, actually see the plague coming through the streets as a pale fog. The earth itself seemed in a state of convulsion, shuddering and spitting, putting forth heavy poisonous winds that destroyed animals and plants and called swarms of insects to life to complete the destruction.
So the landlords turned off the wind and then just like loosed all of this poisonous gas onto the earth, and that's how we ended up with the Black Plague?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I really like, too, he has a passage here, a brief passage on precautions that locals took an account of to avoid inhaling the noxious fog and getting sick. So it says here, if newly baked bread is placed for the night at the end of a pole and in the morning is found to be mildewed and internally grown green, yellow and uneatable, and when thrown to fowls and dogs causes them to die from eating it, in a similar manner if fowls drink the morning dew and die in consequence, then the plague poison is near at hand. So we had to kill a dog.
You just had to add dog death to this goddamn episode.
So if you want to test your bread for plague, toss it to your pets.
See if it kills your pet. Yeah.
He mentions a few other accounts, but I think we get the picture here. He even references historical texts that refer to pestilent fog causing other diseases like cholera, not just the plague. And furthermore, he draws a connection to the punishments doled out by the quote-unquote God, again, always in quotations, in the Old Testament. And all of these stories actually make sense if you assume that these accounts from these people are operating off of the extremely outdated, but at the time ubiquitous conception of the spread of illness, which was the miasma theory.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Before bacteria, we had miasma theory, which is that basically disease and illness was spread via bad or noxious air, and this was sometimes referred to as night air. And you know, like I said, this theory died out when germ theory came onto the scene, but this was a popular thing for hundreds and hundreds of years, to the point where there's various I think there were factories where they had particular setups and stuff in the late 1800s where I can't, what was I reading? I saw a thing. Basically, it affected the way we handled ourselves as humans. We straight up believed. Most people believe this. There were other ideas, but this was one of the prevailing concepts that people were oh, it's like a mist in the air. It's just bad air that's containing diseases. So, interestingly enough, the theory of the miasma theory was put forward by Hippocrates in the 4th century BC, and Bramley even references Hippocrates as an experiencer of pestilent mist phenomena, but he never mentions miasma theory and the fact that it is just like long debunked.
Yeah.
So
That. Yeah. Okay. It's sometimes like you have to like be reminded of the prevailing science of the era.
Yeah.
To like
Yeah.
make these kind of things make sense, because it all feels very tied to just how people thought about the world at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
to use it as like empirical proof of a thing now really kind of takes it out of context in a way that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with it.
Now, this next passage that I kind of wanted to read from the book, I don't know what to do with it. It's bewildering. So Bramley says this: the preceding quotes provide evidence that UFOs, the custodial society, have bombarded the human race with deadly diseases. This evidence is particularly intriguing when we consider claims made by a number of modern UFO contactees who say that they are relaying messages to mankind from the UFO society. Some of them claim that UFOs are here to help mankind and that UFOs will eradicate disease on Earth. The UFO civilization reportedly has no disease. If the custodial civilization is indeed so healthy, perhaps it is only because it is not bombarding itself with germ weapons. If UFOs truly intended to bring health to the human race, maybe all they needed to do was to stop spraying infectious biological agents into the air.
Look, he's treating aliens as a monolith, as if just because one type of alien is bombarding us with bad air doesn't mean that all types of aliens are doing that. Well, other aliens could be trying to cure us of all diseases and not know what the other aliens are doing with their bad air. It's
a constant battle between the aliens that are spraying us with diseases and the aliens that are coming in with the panacea and like fucking curing us. So it's just an ebb and flow between those two factions. And what's crazy is not only is he treating them as a monolith, but it kind of implies that the goodwill that like abductees of like the 50s and 60s experienced in the Space Brothers phenomenon is just false and like by omission, basically.
It's a very like fatalistic view of aliens that is kind of, it feels weird. Like that's not normally how people talk about these things.
Yeah. Well, my little theory is that he has a weird thing with religious war in particular as it relates to Muslims, and so he needs this like grand conspiracy theory to explain why it's okay for him to believe that Muslims are trying to destroy the world.
It does feel like he's using it to shoehorn, like to create some sort of enemy that he can kind of. It's like, it feels like in this case the custodians are maybe like the globalists are for Jewish people.
Kind of, yeah. Well, and here's the thing: like he talks about how he does mention how like the Black Plague led to the persecution of Jewish people once again. Like I think well over 100 Jewish communities in Europe were like destroyed. People were exiled and they like sought refuge. And I want to say Poland, there was like a king there that was giving them, because I did read up on a lot of history of the Black Plague, and this is a very real thing that happened. So he points out how like these factions, these like religious conflicts kind of change over time and they go back and forth. And at the time, the conflict was the Christians trying to eradicate the Jews. And that will lead us into our next portion. But like the way he sees it like that, the current faction that is like slated to start destroying the world is the Muslims, according to him. Yeah, I think that's what's going on here. This is my theory on his theories, but we don't need to get too deep into that.
All right.
So he wraps up his portion on the Black Death by talking about how this chapter ends by talking about how the plague years put humanity through this enormous social and economic upheaval, which again, that's true. People did become like they were casting some doubt on their places in a world where such, godless destruction could be rained down upon them on the one hand. This helped lead humanity towards the Renaissance. But on the other hand, Bramley also says that people were like beginning to falter in their spirituality as a result of this abandonment by God, or at least that's how they saw it. So others further doubled down in their religiosity, fearing the plague was the direct wrath of a god that they'd wronged. And this leaves us with this widespread social and political unrest, and this is a setting for humanity that Bramley posits as being the ideal for the custodians who are manipulating us into warring with each other. So why? Well, here's where we once again really intersect with other stuff we've talked about on the show. These are answers that I got basically from Bramley talking in his interview with Howe. So he admits that he's not actually sure what it is they want, but he has some ideas, some theories, just asking questions. He once again refers to the works of Charles Fort in the early 1900s, who suggested humanity may be akin to cattle or sheep to these alien visitors. And he basically just says that we are literal possessions of these aliens who were once thought of as gods by ancient people. And then as time went on, these gods went from this direct contact with their slaves, us, humanity, to working from the shadows and sort of falling into the background of history. And here we jut up against the idea that, well, I'm just going to say it, it intersects with the Archons and the Anunnaki and things like that. Bramley claims that the UFOs began to follow a more manipulative Machiavellian pattern, that's what his words, not mine, to exert their control. And this is where secret organizations like the Brotherhood come in. So the Brotherhood would establish other obscure branches and secret societies throughout the world. He specifically calls out the Illuminati, and he makes sure to say not the lesser Bavarian Illuminati who's fake, but rather the real Illuminati. And he also talks about the Rosicrucians and a cult-like group of German mystics called the Friends of God. And these societies, often under the control of the Brotherhood of the Snake, served as just effectively controlling arms of the custodians, helping sow discontentment, social unrest, and other myriad afflictions against humanity. And in the book, he even references the Catholic adoption of indulgences through payment to the church as being effectively a mass spiritual weakening. And this is an idea that I am like 99.9% certain you brought up in one of our episodes. I think it was one of on the Archons, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So in the interview, Bramley wraps up with a discussion about another idea core to the Archon and the Anunnaki conspiracy, that we are effectively souls in a thresher and our deaths recycle those souls. So in our return to whatever plane houses our souls, we forget our spiritual sides. And this is what he says. One thing I notice also in the UFO phenomenon that we read about today, a lot of the abductees seem to be given commands or some kind of mental process that is inflicted on them by their captors to make them forget. So the ability of the UFO technology to instill amnesia in human beings seems to be part of their practice. So the question, is this being done on a very large scale? That's where death might fit in, because if we keep forgetting we are souls and keep being recycled over and over again, thinking we are not recycling souls, it maintains being imprisoned here. Now, while the ultimate goal beyond just like simply ownership of Earth is kind of unclear to me, Bramley suggests that events that cause cataclysmic death in humanity's history may serve to keep us spiritually forgetful, and provided his theory on the function of recycled souls is correct. So Howe also jumps in here and offers up another idea that I thought was funny / interesting. And she says, if reincarnation is the machinery of the universe, and there are non-human intelligences that are focused on reincarnation here on Earth, meaning the recycling of a spirit or soul in and out of container bodies over a long period of time, that might even explain dividing the human population into different religious perspectives on purpose, to make them war with each other, because war causes death, and death would lead to the souls having to recycle.
This is definitely something that I think I came up on another episode a while ago, about like the whole like you forget your spiritual self and you have this like amnesia thing, and religion being this like dividing factor. It is funny how much these concepts keep coming up in various things we talk about, because everyone keeps pulling from the same things and just reinterpreting them slightly differently into their own brand of stuff.
Weird stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
it's
Hey, I'm with it.
we've absolutely talked about this, and this kind of wraps it up. Like, basically, I wanted to talk about the plague UFO idea and the custodians.
Hmm.
But I would like it would feel incomplete if I didn't mention also they like basically are rehashing the idea of archons and the Anunnaki and stuff. Um, but they kind of suggest the last thing that he kind of suggests is that humanity is maybe no longer a slave labor force for the custodians. Although in parentheticals it says, or are they? Um, and so
Fantastic.
the purpose of the UFO custodians, now that their entire shtick seems to be coming down to earth and abducting hapless civilians, he kind of says that our usefulness has not gone away, it's just changed over time. And now, for some reason, they are using us for hybrid experiments, coming down, abducting people, harvesting DNA. And that, again, it's like, well, to what end? And that's also pretty open-ended, and Bramley doesn't put forth any like solid theory, but it seems to be implied, at least in my reading of it, that the like quote-unquote true form of humanity is being suppressed. And this idea jives well with the New Age ascension theory stuff. Events like the Black Plague have merely been a means to suppress this latent humanity, and now we're harvested for whatever this hybrid program is about. So
Okay.
that is his theory on the Black Death and plagues throughout history as a tool of custodian UFOs. And I have been opened up to so many more conspiracies, so shouts out to William Bramley, even though you're a freak. That is plague UFOs, custodian UFOs.
Okay. Yeah, I guess like it does make some sense that someone would be like, okay, yeah, UFOs caused the Black Plague, and then kind of figure it out from there. It's just okay. I struggled with like trying to figure out how to process these things, because it's really interesting as like a hypothetical, what if type thing, but is it's just so it feels so like anti I don't know, it really feels like it feels ahistorical, and it feels like he's really fighting all context and historical thought to just try to make it about aliens, which hey, like, more power to you. It's fun, whatever.
Yeah, it's like, God, read the reviews on goodreads.com sometime. It is like, people are just like, this is the fucking text of all texts with conspiracy theory. It is just taking these historical things and trying to form a wide, all-encompassing theory about aliens and secret societies and what they're doing to us to suppress humanity. You can like, and it doesn't help that there's like actual gaps in the history of the Black Plague just because of the situation at the time. And you can't, you just can't leave any you can't let a conspiracy theorist read a book on history that like admits to there being gaps in the story.
Yeah.
It gets the mind churning,
That gap leads just lets either, to some sort of devil or demon, and to some aliens.
Yeah, it makes my gap feel weird.
My gap feels weird.
So
okay,
that is the custodian UFOs. I'm like, I'm going to talk about this guy again and the ideas that are in this book, because there are so many things in here. But I really wanted to talk about plague UFOs. I read about the plague UFOs, and then I realized at the very end, oh shit, he is rehashing New Age ascension and Archon theory. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
But I mean, you're going to come across that. There's no way that we can have a topic that doesn't touch on a thing we talked about.
They'll overlap.
Anymore. Like, that's the world we live in, because everyone is cribbing notes from everybody else.
Yeah, I'm curious if he has any thoughts on the current situation. I'm pretty sure the guy's still around. He has a website that's up, and he's published 2 books. He has like another book called like, Jesus Goes to Los Angeles or something like that.
What?
I don't know, but he's still around. So I'm kind of curious if this idea has to have, like, some conspiracy theorists took this idea and wrote about how UFOs are causing COVID-19. 100%. It's out there. I just didn't look for it.
Okay.
So, are you ready for a big question?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into a big question.
Cool. Okay, Nile. What major event in human history was actually a custodian UFO operation to further suppress humanity's ascension? Do you want me to go first so that you can kind of think about your idea, or maybe I'll tickle something in your brain that helps you
go ahead.
come up with something?
I have to, like, remember what history is anytime you ask me a historical question.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, okay, so here's my example. Mine is the forming of the band Smash Mouth.
Okay.
And I'm kind of going at this based on the fact that they were a huge hit, and we all know that in the, like, late 90s, early 2000s, they were just a huge hit, and people who do this, like, insidious secret society UFO shit do it in plain sight. They got the Astro Lounge. That's their headquarters, right? They're putting it in plain sight on their album cover. And if you just look at what's happening in the last year, Smash Mouth put on that big show in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic.
True.
So I'm going to go ahead and say it. I know a lot of people are thinking it. I'm just saying it. Smash Mouth are agents of the Brotherhood of the Snake. I don't know how else to say it. I just think that's probably the case. Just look at their behavior. I'm sure that if I were to kind of research the various members and look into their pasts and stalk them, I would uncover more information about those guys in Smash Mouth. That leads me to understanding their place in the Brotherhood of the Snake. So that's my idea.
Okay. Well, I think that I'm going to go ahead and say that I guess if I have to, like, pick an event, it would be the premiere of Family Guy. But I'm basically saying that Seth MacFarlane is a member of the Brotherhood of the Snake, and that his entire career of making shows for the Fox network has really worked to undermine humanity's attempt at achieving its perfect form.
So on the one hand, we have the musical side, the musical branch of the Brotherhood of the Snake as servants of the UFO custodians in Smash Mouth. And then we have the television media side that's doing the same thing, but through funny little cartoons.
Well, because we know that the entertainment industry is triangle symbol Illuminati.
True.
Underneath, and we're not talking about the fake Bavarian Illuminati. We're talking about the real one that definitely is out there. So yeah, I think that, like, you don't come to the level of success and longevity that Seth MacFarlane has while only having one idea, without being, working for the custodians of the earth.
That's just fact. Yeah. And do you think maybe that, like, say, The Simpsons were the sort of counterforce that were, like, predicting the moves of the custodians in the creation of Family Guy, and they're like, we're going to counterbalance the energies of Family Guy before it happens with the fun family, comedy family known as The Simpsons. We got the blue hair Marge, and we got the Doe Homer, and the brat boy, and the liberal girl. And they were just we'll put out the good energies, but then they were overtaken over time, kind of like what happened to the actual Brotherhood of the Snake. And now they're basically the same energy output as Family Guy.
What's really funny is that in a thing that I didn't go into in my last episode about was effectively Matt Groening's ties to the Yellow Cube and possibly as an agent of, like,
what?
An agent of Project Looking Glass and all that kind of stuff. Because it was so, like, it relied on a lot of the kind of stuff of, like, Family Guy predicts all these, not Family Guy, Simpsons predict all this future stuff. And it effectively is built around that whole concept. but it's funny to bring up the Simpsons in this, because that is legitimately a thing I could have just done, like, I don't know, 5 minutes on in the last episode, but kind of ran out of time.
Well, that makes perfect sense, though, right? Because not only do they counterbalance the energies that are going to come when the Archons put out Family Guy, but they also offer warnings to the populace who's in love with the Yellow family.
Yeah.
And they see these predictions, but they, there's a counter campaign at all times. So there's these two kind of warring forces. Now, he doesn't get into the warring forces against the Custodians, but I'm assuming they have to exist.
Yeah, I mean, he's too caught up in the whole aliens as a monolith thing to realize that there are aliens trying to do good out there by creating quality content, such as the last 20 years of The Simpsons.
Exactly.
And so I think that there is something to say about that.
And we just did, frankly. we just said something about it.
Oh man. So yeah, that's a whole thing. Matt Groening supposedly lived around a place called Looking Glass,
oh my
Missouri
God.
and stuff. There's all this nonsense.
That's amazing.
But that's neither here nor there. So let's go ahead and wrap this one up. We'll go ahead and take care of some business. So if you want to find more episodes of the show, you can find us on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers, from Stitcher to Google Play to Apple Podcasts to Spotify. If you listen to podcasts somewhere, look up It Gets Weird, and we're probably there.
ItGetsWeirdPodcast@gmail.com. What's your favorite Simpsons episode? Let me know.
Mine's probably Mr. Plow.
I almost said Mr. Plow, but I'd really have to think about it. I'm partial to oh my God, I'm not going to remember the monorail. I really love the monorail. But listeners, you can email us your favorite Simpsons episodes, or really whatever you want, to itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. And those emails will be so nutritious for us. Oh, you have no idea. And then, of course, patreon.com/itgetsweird. We have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. At both levels, you're going to get some bonus content. $5 tier gets a little extra bonus content. Actually, if you think about it, because we upload the bonus content for the $2 tier in the off week of the $5 tier's content, but then the $5 tier gets both. So $5, you get bonus content every single week, and you get episodes 2 days early, regardless of which tier you donate at. And regardless of which tier you donate at, you get access to our secret Discord chat where we hang out and we talk about Bigfoot. And we do talk about a lot of Bigfoot. I'm not going to lie. We talk about Bigfoot a lot. Other things too, but Bigfoot's a big subject there. And aliens, of course. So if that sounds awesome to you, and you got some money you want to kick our way, go ahead and check it out. We also have a $1 tier where you're just donating a tip to us, kind of say thanks. You don't get anything out of it. It's just, I like your show. Here's $1. If you can't donate, maybe try telling people about our show. We don't do any advertising because it sucks ass. And we only spread by word of mouth.
Advertising, not our show.
No.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, true. So tell your friends, tell your enemies, and tell your Congress people what's going on. Tell them, hey, I listen to It Gets Weird, and I think you should too. I think you'd really like it. And if it's your enemy, maybe get out of the way before they start swinging at you or something. But just make sure to let them know before they start throwing hands. Check out It Gets Weird Podcast, and then get out of danger's way. I don't know what kind of relationship you and your enemies have, but I'm assuming it's a pretty tumultuous and potentially violent one. So just be careful out there. I think that about
catch
wraps
these
it
hands
up.
And then check this podcast.
Yeah,
that's the new motto going forward for It Gets Weird. So thank you all for listening. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Nile,
and I'm Kyle signing out.
Peace.